Hello. So in this build of the game, we managed to implement a few more features in here. So the menu's always been there, which is nice, but I've reworked the entire front page UI to make it a bit cleaner and just more aesthetically pleasing to look at. And now when we play the game, we have functional pickups that work, which is pretty nice to see. The restart buttons, everything works there. So for pickups, I initially wanted to do some sort of UI that represents like a countdown or maybe like a cooldown bar to show that, okay, the power up is about to finish. But I couldn't really get that working, and I think I'd seen a few other people do it, so I decided to take a bit of a different approach. So I have the pickups actually spin around the player, like many versions of it, and they kind of represent that, okay, like for example, we've got the magnet, and it's working, it's doing its thing. The shield also gets picked up, and the magnet lets you like attract coins to the player, whereas the shield just lets you tank any free hit from an obstacle or a boss. So that was a fun. The logic was very straightforward. Fortunately, since I'd implemented the coins already, getting the pickups to work as they should was very easy to do. All I had to do was just implement the actual, pickup logic. All right, so one of the hardest things to get done this time was implementing the boss. The boss was a complete nightmare to do. So in this gameplay instance, there's still that shield bug. The boss will spawn after about 300 or so meters in the player's distance here. And what the boss does is it tracks the player for a specific period of time. After that, it just keeps following the player, messing with them, And then at a certain point, it will decide to stop and slam onto the ground. And if the player is unfortunate enough to be in its way, well, I guess they get slammed too. So it's not really an AI, but it's a fairly straightforward system, and it just uses a recursive method, well, coroutine to be exact, to get this function working. So I'm just gonna die. I'm gonna let him kill me. Do your thing. There you go. And then we're gonna use the game. So one of the biggest hurdles this time was the actual modeling of objects. So a lot of this stuff had to be modeled from scratch, basically. Working 3ds Max to get all these models looking nice and trying my utmost best to have, not like 2 billion polygons on the objects. So every tile level is made up of like just this little platform where the player actually runs across. And at each point there's an indicator or marker. I can actually show that in game. The prefabs here on tiles. So look at the actual tiles themselves. Okay, so implementing the actual models in game was quite the hassle, if I'm going to be completely honest. The textures look a bit squiff, a bit stretchy there, but anyway, we move. The front part matters the most because that's what the player actually sees. So I had to implement a bunch of new systems in here to get certain things working. So for example, the objects spawn in a specific manner, and then the player also has their own pickups that also happen to spawn at the start of the tile, and then the obstacles themselves at the end of the tile. But otherwise, the transition to get this working managed to go well, fortunately. I also had to extend the hitboxes of certain things. For example, this thing's collider is actually a bit misleading. It's a lot wider than the actual pillar is, because I realized at some point the player kept like falling off way too early. Like if you mistimed your jump, it was brutal. And I was like, okay, that's a bit of a difficulty spike. Let me actually just adjust that real quick. As for the code itself, the code is the most new things to take a look at are the boss spawner, because this just simply brings the boss into the game. Then after that is the boss behavior. So the boss behavior is what determines how the boss moves around and attacks the player. This is a nightmare of coroutines, is I'll say. I have about 1, 2, 3, I think I have about 5 coroutines that all determine how it works. But for the most part, the boss pattern just goes in here. So it says the boss is, firstly, it tells the boss that it's not in position, and then determines if the boss has just spawned. It waits a few seconds, and then it starts a coroutine to catch up to the player. So you see here, and then after that it waits a few seconds, it then just pauses, and then it slams onto the ground. Then after that, the player has to dodge it or just avoid it or move around. There's a bit more going on here, but if I explain it off, that will be here for a while. But for the most part, I think it is a pretty solid prototype to work off. Yeah, thanks for watching the devlog. Bye. Ah, crap.